Hello and welcome. Let's face it, most business school applicants typically apply to five or six, sometimes a lot more, MBA programs, and usually there's a great deal of overlap between the application essay prompts of business schools. So this can put applicants in a difficult situation because they're applying to lots of schools at the same time, and they wonder how much they can borrow from their different essays. So how we navigate this labyrinth without squandering your valuable time and energy is one of the most common practical questions that I get asked as I help MBA applicants with their personal statements. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, my name is Brian Fobi. I'm the founder of GuruFi.com, and today I'm going to offer you a presentation about how to repurpose your MBA essays and how to think about how you approach the complicated question of multiple MBA applications, especially because so many of you are out there in the working world and your time is both limited and valuable. And so before we launch, I just want to say be sure that you like the video if you're watching us on YouTube or any of the other social channels. And if you have any questions, be sure to ask. I will see them as they pop up, and there will also be some time at the end of the presentation to take questions. But if you have any questions along the way, be sure to ask. All right. So as I said, today we're going to talk about how you juggle multiple MBA applications. And as I noted before, I'm Brian Fobi, the co-founder of GuruFi.com. I've been doing this since 2010. Every year we help applicants to both, kind of the top MBA programs and kind of more regular MBA programs get into their top schools. And so last year, which is sort of just wrapping up for us, we had one of our most successful to date. And a lot of our applicants get into Stanford, GSB, Wharton, Oxford, Syed, and a lot of the other top schools. So check us out at GuruFi.com if you need help with your personal statement, or if you have any questions, be sure to send us an email at service@GuruFi.com. Especially in the days after I do these GMAT club sessions, I will personally answer any of the questions that you have about this topic or any other topic regarding your MBA personal statement. All right, let's jump in. Okay, so how you calmly walk the application tightrope when most of you have jobs that take a lot of time. And the typical applicant will apply to about 6 to 8 programs as normal. I have had some people apply to 30, which I think is way too many. And there are some who will only apply to 1 or 2. But unless you're only applying to one of the practical questions that come up is whether or not it's okay and whether or not it's a smart strategy to borrow or to repurpose parts of your essay or an entire essay as part of your MBA application. A couple of things to keep in mind. A lot of these MBA applicants or applications rather have a lot of overlap in terms of the prompts that they ask. They might have, slightly different wording. The word limits can vary. But there can be a lot of overlap, and there's some basic themes that you will encounter over and over as you go through your MBA personal statements, especially when you kind of put together your final list of the schools that you're going to apply to. You'll see like, oh, these schools are pretty similar. But it's also the case that two schools that have very similar sounding or worded prompts, or they seem to be asking the same things, because the schools are very different and they look for different things in applicants. It's also the case that they are very different in terms of what is required of you and your approach. Complicating that, as I said, is you don't want to waste a lot of energy and time in the application process, but it's also the case that you don't want to cut corners. You're making a decision not just for the next couple of years of your life, but something that will set the trajectory of your career. And so you do want to make sure that you do invest the time necessary to make sure that your personal statement is as strong as it can possibly be. And so what you then have is kind of a balancing act where you certainly don't want to waste energy, but you also want to make sure that you're not cutting corners. So when people talk to me or they ask me about, is it okay to repurpose essays? I kind of start with the 3 basic rules or ideas. The first one is that you should treat each application as its own thing. For all of these, I'm going to get into more detail. First, treat each application as its own thing. Don't just look to have one cookie cutter essay that you can then use everywhere, which brings us to the second point. Do not try to shoehorn in an essay. That is, if you've already written an essay and another school's prompt is asking you something that seems slightly different, but you're like, I've already written this. Let me just jam it in there. Also not a great idea. And then the last one is there's nothing wrong with repurposing text. Okay. There's no plagiarism involved here. These are your ideas, your words. So that's fine. It is not just one of these things that everybody does. It's also understood and in some ways even expected that you will do this if you're applying to lots of different schools. All right. So let me talk about each of these things in order. So first, treat each application as its own thing. Now, I think last year or maybe the year before, I did a video for GMAT Club that was focused on brainstorming. So I'm not going to go over that in a huge amount of detail. If anyone is interested in some really great brainstorming exercises that you can use to really supercharge your essay, shoot me an email, service@gurufi.com. I'll send you that link. It's also up on the GMAT Club video YouTube page. But the important thing for you today is you should begin the application process by brainstorming the answers to these 3 questions for each of the schools that you're applying to. First, what do they value? Second, why am I a good fit for that school? And third, what would I do while at that school to position myself for long-term success? Now, let me say something kind of about the big picture approach to how you should be writing these essays if you have multiple essays. Now, if you are in the process of looking at or thinking about your personal statement right now, it's probably the case since most deadlines have passed, not all, but most deadlines have passed for fall 2024 admissions, that you're probably pretty early on, right? So this especially applies for people who are just starting their MBA application journey. The thing that I normally suggest is that you focus first on your GMAT, all right? And there's a couple of different reasons for it. One, studying for a standardized test takes a lot of energy and focus. If I can give a little plug for the GMAT Club site, they've got a lot of great resources for people who are looking to improve their score. But the second thing is you can actually start working on your essay even if you're not actually working on it. And here's what I mean. What I like to do for brainstorming, you can get a notebook, or if you have, note cards, you can do this as well. You can just, for each of the schools that you're applying to, write one question on, so let's say you're applying to Stanford, Wharton, and Columbia. So you would get 9 note cards. And for Stanford, you would have, what do they value on one note card? Why am I a good fit on another note card? And what would I do while there at Stanford to position my success? You do the same thing for Wharton and Columbia. And you don't have to schedule time for this, right? So this is while you're studying for your GMAT. And anytime you have an idea about any aspect of your personal statement that addresses one of these 3 questions, you can just take a quick couple of minutes and write out some ideas. And you can also, if you have a notebook, anytime you have any ideas for any of these personal statements, just quickly write them down. So a couple minutes here and there. And the really beautiful thing about this is there's so much really great neuroscience research about how the brain works. And it's almost like you have this other computer that's just working in the background. And so if you have already started to think about, even kind of passively, about different essays that you want to write, even if you don't actually end up sitting down and writing your outline or your first draft for 3 or 4 months, what's happening is your brain is, one, more attuned to those things, so that anytime you have a conversation or an interaction, or you think about something like, hey, I should actually put that towards my Stanford personal statement. But also your brain is just kind of running in the background. And, whether, I'm one of these people who gets all my ideas in the shower or that's a common thing, or out on a walk, it will just come to you. So I say, focus explicitly on your GMAT, but also do, 20 minutes of research early on in the process for each of the schools focused on these 3 questions. And then when it comes time to actually do the explicit outlining and writing, you'll find that your brain is really primed to knock these out of the park. Second point is, do not try to shoehorn an essay. That is, as I noted before, a lot of times, if you really like an essay, so let's say the first school that you applied to in the process is you applied to, Stanford, and you really love your essay for Stanford. And then you come to Duke and they ask kind of a different thing, but you're like, well, this is a really well written essay, so let me just kind of like rework it, make sure I, find and change all the instances where I talk about Stanford and insert Duke. Don't do that. It is absolutely true that writing essays can take a lot of time and energy, but it's worth it. And when essays just don't quite feel right, a lot of times it's because they've just been in a really kind of slapdash manner, have been repurposed from a previous prompt. And so you don't want to do that. I'm going to talk about in a second how you can use some text and some ideas from prior essays, but there's an important mental shift that you need to make that I'll talk here about in a second in terms of how you approach these things. So what you don't want to do is just try to shoehorn an old essay into a new application. And then lastly, there is nothing wrong with repurposing text. But the important mental shift that you should make is, instead of thinking about how you can turn an existing essay for school A, right, into an essay for school B, what you should do is, once you're done with your application for school A, so let's say in this example it's Harvard, right? Set that aside. All right. And then mentally say to yourself, we're going to start over and write this next essay. Then in the course of writing the essay for the second school, if there's a section or some ideas that you're covering that are the same or very similar, then you can copy and paste those. And I would urge you to do this sentence by sentence, so that for each sentence you bring over, you're thinking about how well it fits within the context of what you're trying to do and within the context of that particular school. You copy paste sentence by sentence into the new essay that you're writing. The important thing about this approach and why it's different is that you're intentional every step along the way about what you're including and how you're tailoring it to fit your school. So you're not just trying to jam something in. You're saying, okay, what I want to say right here with respect to how it fits to Duke is that I'm a great collaborator. So is there something from my Harvard essay where I do a really great job of talking about that? So you'll then bring that in, but tailor it along the way. And so you are repurposing text, and you are making sure that you don't waste energy, but it's still absolutely the case that it is designed and tailored and well constructed for that school, and not just something that you've jammed in. And, as an aside, if you have worked in admissions or you talk to people who've worked in admissions, one of the more frequent unfortunate things that you will see happen is that people are so intent on just reusing essays that they will sometimes even forget to remove the name of the old school. So if they're replying to Wharton, they'll mention how they're really excited to go to Harvard. And I'm sure, when the Wharton readers are encountered with that, they say, well, have fun at Harvard. Sounds like you really want to go, but you're not coming here, right? So that's all just to say, make sure that you're really thoughtful about each bit of text that you're moving into your second essay, and that you're doing it because you've already written a really great version and not just because you want to save a little bit of time. All right. So I've talked about this in kind of an abstract way. And so let me talk a little bit about how this might look like in action in a very specific case. So this is actually a slightly changed version from a client that I worked with. I asked her if I could use her story. I think it's 3 or 4 years ago. And she got into both Duke and Stanford. And she did end up using parts of her essays for both schools. And I want to talk a little bit about how we approached that and in our collaboration together and my helping her through this process. And what it looks like in a concrete way when you go through and you do have multiple applications and you use parts of an old application for a new one. So Stanford's prompt for their personal statement is one that a lot of you might know. It's actually a two-parter, but we're going to focus on just the first part. The first essay, which is what matters most to you and why. And then Duke's is based on your understanding of Duke Fuqua culture. What are 3 ways you expect to contribute at Fuqua? So I said to her, why don't we start with Stanford? There's a lot of reasons for that. Whenever someone is applying to Stanford, I actually like for them to begin with Stanford because I really love Stanford's prompt, because I think it does a really good job of forcing people to dig in and talk about why they want to go to business school at a really deep and personal level, and that can help inform future essays. But setting that aside, so I said, let's go ahead and start with the Stanford essay. All right. So I said the first step is you want to do research on each of the schools. All right. And I already talked a little bit before about the brainstorming outlines. And so we did those, and there's some additional brainstorming exercises that I'll sometimes do with clients. She did those as well. And so she did some brainstorming outlines. She then drafted Stanford, and then she drafted Duke. And she borrowed some sections from Stanford. And I'm going to show you concretely what that looks like. All right. So when she did her Stanford brainstorming, right, it was a lot more detailed than this, right? She, pages and pages of stuff, but it sort of boiled down to what was here. So in her research and brainstorming for Stanford, she started by asking the first question that I said you should address is, what do they value? Stanford GSB, as you know, they value, among other things, entrepreneurship, thinking big, and problem solving. And she said, why am I a good fit for this school? And what her goal was, her professional goal was to found a for-profit that empowered youth in Malawi, which is where her parents had lived. She was part of the Indian diaspora that had gone to Southern Africa. She intended to found a for-profit that empowered youth in Malawi to found tech startups. And in fact, she had already built her first company in partnership with a Malawian nonprofit. And so she had some experience in this area. And so based on her understanding of what Stanford had and the resources, that made her a good fit there. And she said, what would I do while there to position myself for success? And she said, well, obviously you have access to Silicon Valley, GSB alums. There's also Stanford features leadership courses like Touchy Feely. They also have a startup lab, on and on, like all the kind of research-based things that you will find in the course of finding out about a school and aligning it with where you want to go. All right. So that was kind of her rough brainstorming ideas that she laid out. And from there, she created a sample outline. And again, the prompt is what matters most to me. It says what matters most to me is using technology and business to transform marginalized communities in sub-Saharan Africa. She then talked about founding her nonprofit. It was sort of a profit nonprofit hybrid, actually, but that's neither here nor there. She then talked about the challenges she faced and how she recognized she needed some additional training, some additional knowledge, some relationships, understanding of other adjacent fields, etc. What she hoped to do next, and then specifically how Stanford could provide her with the knowledge, relationships, and skills that she needed to achieve the thing that mattered most to her, and that the ability, for example, to work with and collaborate with classmates who are active in Oakland, which is an area sort of near Silicon Valley, and other areas. And then she concluded. All right. So she used this to write a really great personal statement for Stanford that helped her get in, among other things. She was a compelling candidate overall, but it was a strong essay. All right. Then she decided, okay, we're done with Stanford. Let's look at the Duke Fuqua School of Business. And so remember, the prompt for Duke is, what are 3 ways that you expect to contribute at Fuqua? All right. So that's the thing she's keeping in mind as she works through these brainstorming questions that I asked her to do for this. And so it says, what do they value? Community, thinking big, and they have a new STEM emphasis that Duke Fuqua is really leaning into. So notice right away, this idea of thinking big is already something that was in her Stanford outline, right? Why am I a good fit at Fuqua? Fuqua seeks well-rounded people. This is something they really emphasize. It's important to them that they create a dynamic community, that people like each other, that it's a close-knit sort of group. And Fuqua likes the idea of people who operate at the intersection of technology, business, and community. She intended to found a for-profit that empowers youth in Malawi to found tech startups. So she felt that fit well within kind of the type of person that Fuqua was looking for. And she'd already built her first company in partnership with a Malawian nonprofit. Now, again, notice that those last 2 things were things that she could directly draw on from her Stanford essay. Okay. And then lastly, what would I do while there to position myself for success? Um, they have Duke Fuqua has a kind of a robust culture for ESG and also has startup support. So there's different things that they do to help people who are looking to generate a startup. All right, that has some overlap to some of the things that were in her Stanford essay. So you see about half ish of the text or the outlining materials was already things that she had covered in her Stanford GSB essay. And so when she then went to um, create her outline for Duke Fuqua, right? You'll notice that some of the things are pretty similar. An introduction is almost always, or it should be. I feel like introductions and conclusions will tend to be the spaces that are much more tailored to the particular school, although that's not always the case. Um, so her introduction is she wants to grow within a culture that features collaboration, values the role of business in improving society, and provides opportunities for outreach. And she wants to become active in all three of those areas to support Fuqua's dynamic community. So point one, she talks about supporting collaboration. And this is where she brought in the story of the nonprofit that she had already founded. And this is what you might call a proof of concept. And so the idea is whenever you have a personal statement that it's asking you to talk about, or you decide to talk about values or things that are important to you, it's great that you do that, but you also need to demonstrate that this isn't just something, that you're talking about vaguely. There's proof of concept that is, that the applicant cares about that because they've already done something in that area. That's the best way to show that. So she could bring in a version of that discussion that she had about the nonprofit that she founded already. Second, she could, the second part of the essay was talk about participating in Duke Fuqua's ESG efforts. And here she could discuss her vision for ESG in Malawi. And again, this is something that she could pull from her Stanford essay. It had already been covered there. And so she brought in large chunks of that text. But again, this is not just taking the Stanford essay and figuring out how to edit it to fit Duke Fuqua. She's building a new essay, but with big chunks of text that she's pulling from Stanford. And it's an important difference. Here, she also references the Duke resources and opportunities to contribute. She wanted to engage in outreach in the Durham community. Durham is the city where Duke University is located. And here I put that in yellow instead of red because it is similar to her discussion about what she hoped to do in the Oakland community, because she knew that there were students at Stanford who were doing things in Oakland. And she felt like there's some similarities to what she'd written about there that she could pull over into her discussion about what she wanted to do at Duke Fuqua. And then she has her conclusion. All right. So this was a highly successful approach for her. She got into both schools, among others. And again, I think that she did a really nice job of splitting the difference between talking about something or writing about things in ways that are really specific to those schools in terms of what they care about and what they're looking for and what they offer. But at the same time, you're not reinventing the wheel completely for every essay, that you're splitting the difference. If you already have text that works to talk about the thing you want to, then you bring it in. But if not, then you're generating it from scratch. Now, as I said, both of these essays are full, custom, and tailored, right? You wouldn't read her Fuqua essay and be like, oh, this feels like it's just a Stanford essay that she swapped out some words. All right. Because it really is a Duke essay, because she cared from the start, from the beginning, to make sure that each of her essays addressed the things that the respective schools cared about. But the most important body section, right, the kind of the guts, the spine of the essay, they're very similar in some ways. There's a lot of text that was pulled over, so she didn't have to reinvent the wheel there. The conclusions are similar, but less so. And here's the other thing, right? These aren't the only two schools that she applied to. And this will be your experience, the more schools that you apply to. So if you're the type of person who is, in fact, applying to 8 schools, what you will find is that for each one that you do, you've covered more and more ground, so that by the time you are, writing for essays 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you will create an outline, but then you'll say, oh, I already talked about this in the Columbia essay. Let me pull that in. I already talked about this in my Michigan Ross essay. I already, Kellogg, whatever. And so you can start to pull those things. That stuff already exists. You want to make sure that you take the same thoughtful, mindful approach to what you include so that everything is well directed toward the essay. And you do this by making sure that you brainstorm for each essay. But the more that you go along in this process, the less kind of novel information you'll need to generate. And so, like I said, essays 4, 5, and 6 will be much less work than essay 2 and 3, and certainly much less work than essay 1. And a lot of times, in fact, what you'll end up finding is that most of the work tends to be around either expanding or contracting ideas to fit word counts. All right. But as long as you take a mindful approach of building something new each time, where you borrow instead of looking to, rewrite an essay that you already have, then you're on the right track. So like I said, if this is something that you're looking to do, or you're worried about your capacity to construct multiple essays in ways that are interesting and dynamic, check us out at GuruFi. In the last, I don't want to make myself feel old. I guess this will be our 17th year coming up. Over 10,000 applicants have gotten into their dream schools, and we focus exclusively on personal statements and CVs and helping people to build those. So check us out at gurufi.com. I went a little bit fast there. So let me know if you have questions either about any of this information or personal statements generally, especially if you're just beginning this process and you're thinking about different approaches. Let me jump over there. I see this. What's the right month? Done with GMAT for first round. My age is 35. It's going to impact my selection. All right. So let me start at the top with the question. Joy has a question about when is the right month to do the GMAT for first round in September. My age is 35. Is that going to impact my selection? There's two questions there. The right month, I think it's less a function of right month and more about, I like to have it, or to approach, or I tell clients that they should approach it, that you want the GMAT to be done and not a thing that you're worried about in an ideal world. It's not always the case that you can do this. To be done is the thing that you're worried about when you start the rest of the application process. Part of that is, bluntly, it will inform, it's not the only thing, but it will often inform the schools that you are selecting to apply to. And so getting it done first makes sense. It will oftentimes also, to be frank, if you don't get the score you want, it might mean that it will determine what round or even what year you apply. If you know that your scores, when combined with other factors, just aren't going to put you in the ballpark for the schools that you want to go to, it might be the case that you say, okay, I'm going to dedicate 4, 5, 6 months, whatever, to killing the GMAT club or the GMAT so that I can get the score that I need. Right. So once it's done, so most of the applicants that I work with in, say, August, they have done they've done the GMAT by spring. All right. So, before June. Right. That is something that they've taken care of. The second question about your age, it's never too late to apply. 35. You're on the older end of the applicants, but I had a woman who applied to Yale School of Management. I believe this was early on. This is maybe 10 years or so ago. Who was almost 60, and this wasn't the EMBA program. This was the regular program. And she got in there and other places as well. So you can do it. The thing that I will sometimes tell people is, if you feel like it's something that you can't fix, then you should feature it. Talk about your life story and your journey to that point. There's probably a reason or a story behind why you're applying a little bit later than other applicants. It's often the case that will be a compelling story, an interesting story, something that provides context to your application that will make it more personal. But I would certainly say that 35 isn't, isn't too old to do this. It's just you have to do the additional thing of um, asking yourself, like, why is it that I'm doing this at this age? And there might be a great story that's in there. Um, let's see. So next, so need help. I've done a good amount of things. My worry is prioritizing what to highlight in my essays. All right. Zero K Zone says, done a good amount of things. My worry is prioritizing what to highlight in my essays. So um, this is kind of the big question when you're writing a personal statement, is to figure out what to write. It sounds sort of basic, but it is. Um, there's a couple of things you can do to make this process a little easier for you, or to make it clearer what you should do. The first is, if you have a set of schools that you're looking at, go through and ask yourself what they're looking for and what they prioritize, and do that brainstorming exercise that I talked about earlier. So you go through, and as you kind of think about, like, well, they care about the X, Y, and Z. What in my life aligns with those things? All right. And so I'm not asking you to be like, dishonest or something like that, but it's rather like, all of us are a lot of different things. And so you have to choose, like, what are the things to highlight? And so kind of the theme of today's presentation is, at different schools, you will highlight different aspects of your professional achievements, of your life story, et cetera, based on the things that they value, that those schools value. Second, talk to people who know you. As I often say when I give these presentations, one of the most difficult things about writing a personal statement is that psychologically and emotionally healthy people don't kind of think of themselves as amazing people. Even people who are amazing, they just sort of think of themselves as ordinary, because the life that they live is, at the end of the day, their everyday life, Um, and so if you talk to someone and you say, what do you think is unusual about my life? What do you think is exceptional about my life? What do you think I do really well? If you have a boss or a mentor, ask them, like, what have I done that's been impressive? What talents do I show? If I were to go to a business school, just have these conversations with people. A lot of times, that third party information can be really insightful. You can also come, and if you work with us at GuruFi or people in other companies, one of the things that we will do for people who don't have drafts of their essays is, there's a little intake process that we do where we talk about their different career achievements. And in the course of those conversations, I can tell you over and over and over, the times that people have thought that something that they've done is just not impressive, or even that it's a negative. And I kind of have to convince them, that was an amazing thing you did. Highlight that in your essay, and they end up getting into, really great schools. That's just to say that, you live your life in a way that can sometimes make it difficult for you to see. And so get those outside opinions, those outside perspectives. I also last year made a short video about how to use Chat GPT. And one of the kind of fun things that you can do is, if you have a detailed CV, copy paste it into Chat GPT and ask it. If you were to write a MBA personal statement, what 4 things would you highlight, right? And see what it says. You might find that that's an insightful bit of insight. I think, for what it's worth, that talking to a professional would be better, but as a place to start, it's certainly really great. And so all those things are ways that you can go through the process of figuring out what to include. And a lot of that is getting out of your own shoes and trying to see your life and your career from other points of view. All right. Rex Kofi Ando says, I'm really confused as to whether to sit for the GMAT or the GRE. I read mathematics, but colleagues who tell me the GRE is much easier than GMAT, but I want to sit for the GMAT. Yeah, so GRE math is quite easy. Well, I don't want to be snobby about it. There is a scale that admissions departments use, and you can find it online, that will functionally give you like a percentile equivalent for each. So I don't do a ton of stuff on the testing side of things. I'm fairly familiar with it. Um, and so, part of that is not every school will take the GRE. Many do. Um, and so, yeah, here's how I would say it. If you are strong in math, the score that you get on GRE in math is likely to be quite high. So I did not study math. Well, I took 1 year of college math, and when I took the GRE, I scored in the 99th percentile, which shocked me because I'm not a math guy. It's history PhD. But it's if for people who are familiar with the American educational system, the GRE math is actually easier than the math questions that they use for the SAT. At least it was years ago when I took it. And so um, you're going to get a higher score. But it's also the case that if you feel like you can get a high score on the GMAT mathematics, then a high score on that is going to be more impressive than on the GRE. And the place to start is to take some practice tests and see where you do with them, score wise. The other thing to consider is the type of school that you're applying to. Um, some schools will care more about the verbal or analytical stuff on these tests than like the math part. Others, if it's you're looking at a quant emphasis in either your application, what you're focusing on, or what the school cares about, then you'll want to make sure that you find ways to highlight that, and taking the more difficult test and doing well on it would be more impactful. But yeah, I would start there. Take practice tests in each, and see where that puts you. And also be aware of what particular schools care about. All right. Um, I think that, let me look if there's more questions. Are there more questions that people have about this or other topics? I can wait for a minute. Um, the other thing I'll say, just while I wait for a minute, is that if you are starting the process now for applying in round one, it's September functionally, um, you're on a really nice timeline, and so what I would emphasize is get the GMAT out of the way, or the GRE if that's the route you're going. But get the standardized test out of the way, and that will allow you a fairly comfortable summer. As comfortable as these things can be, um, applying. And that is, if your school requires a CV, parenthetically, we help people with CVs. Also working with your uh, mentors and letter writers to get that sorted out. You never want to leave that to the last minute. And so, and also doing those exercises that I talked about earlier on in the presentation, where we focused on how do you kind of prime yourself to begin working on the questions before you begin working on them. So doing all of those things so that when you're ready to go, you'll be, all your ideas will be fully chambered and ready to fire. Once again, thank you for everyone who showed up and all your questions. If you do have more questions, be sure to hit me up, service@gurufy.com. Please make sure that you like the video and subscribe if you want more GMAT Club content. And make sure you check us out at gurufy.com, GURUFI.com, right there on the screen. Once again, thank you for everyone for showing up. I wish all of you guys the best of luck in your MBA applications and your future beyond. All right, have a great day.